Louisville certainly added the most transfers in the ACC, but does Pat Kelsey have the best class?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Happy Monday to you. It's the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This is my guy, Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen or watch. Reminder that you can find every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. We want to send a special shout out to all the everydayers joining us and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord. So glad you're all here. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, in the dog days of summer, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Andy, it's transfer portal week here on the show as we flip the calendar from July to August, and that means it's going to be a new athletics calendar year, and that once we hit August, September, October, November, we're 3 short months away from the start of the season. I can hardly believe it. So, Andy, here's how this is going to go this week. I say that as though I'm telling you for the first time. All you wonderful listeners and watchers out there, here's how transfer portal week is working on the show. We're going to take Monday through Friday this week. We're going to hit the Power 5 conferences. ACC today, Big 12 tomorrow, Big East on Wednesday, Big 10 Thursday, SEC on Friday. And then next Monday is like the cherry on top of transfer week on Locked On College Basketball. We'll do a best of the rest of the, every other of the 26 other conferences out there in Division I. So the way the structure of the shows are going to go, each one of these, so you can kind of get in the rhythm of it, we'll give you an all-conference first team, some honorable mentions for that. Then in segment 2, we're going to rank the classes. We'll give you a top 5, maybe some honorable mentions. And then segment 3, turn it into the yearbook. We're going to give you some superlatives like best NBA draft prospect, etc. Andy, I'm looking super forward to this. I hope you are too. Let's get right into it. Why don't you hit us with who we have picked for our All-ACC transfer team?
Transfer team. To be clear for everybody out there, where Cooper Flagg's not going to be on this list because he's not a transfer. We're talking players transferring into the ACC.
Andy, he is transferring from high school to college.
That's true. We're going to talk the 5 players that we would put on our all transfer first team for the ACC preseason. We'll talk about some other possibilities as well.
Preseason, that's a critical word here.
Yes, that is a critical word here. We didn't do this intentionally, although in this situation, all 5 of the players that we labeled are on different teams. We are going to try to talk about as many different teams and as many different transfer portal classes as we can. So starting with the all transfer first team for the ACC. We got a handful of fantastic players on here. We got Sion James coming over to Duke. We got Terrence Edwards at Louisville. I know we'll talk a lot about him. He's a very, very exciting player coming to Pat Kelsey's program. Javion McCollum coming to Georgia Tech. We talked about Oklahoma last week on the show, and Oklahoma and Georgia Tech facing each other in the ACC-SEC Challenge. Should be a fun matchup for Javion McCollum in that one. Cade Tyson, sharpshooter from Belmont, joining the Tar Heels of North Carolina. And then you cannot talk about potential all-ACC or all-transfer players in the conference without talking about a player who transferred to Wake Forest, specifically without talking about a guard transferring to Wake Forest. Got the Demon Deacons shirt on for those of you watching on YouTube. Steve Forbes is a guard whisperer. When they land guards, you need to pay attention to it. Tyler Johnson coming to Wake Forest from Louisville. Very exciting addition there. He rounds out our projected top 5 all-transfer first team for the ACC.
Yeah, Andy, this is fun, man. I love getting into list making time like this. It just makes my heart happy. As you look at this, we've got some honorable mentions we want to get to, but before we mention them, who do you, of this 5, who do you feel most confident in? Who do you feel least confident in, either because of role or capability or anything like that?
I think I feel most confident in James for Duke, just because it feels like he's pretty locked into a role for Duke, and he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. He's a guy who averaged 14 points a game last year at Tulane. He's a decent passer. He was a decent rebounder. Shot 38% from three last year. I think we'll talk a little bit more about Duke's class later in the show. A lot of what John Shire has done is brought in kind of role player types. Mason Gillis coming in, Malik Brown at Syracuse, like guys who are going to fill roles. Whereas I think James, he's going to have the ball a lot. He's also got Cooper Flagg on his team. He's got Tyrese Proctor on his team. So, there's still some hesitation in terms of exactly what that role looks like, but I think he's going to do enough. And if you're starting and you're playing big minutes at Duke, which is where I'm projecting for him right now, you're pretty likely going to be in that conversation as an all-conference player, or certainly at least an all-transfer roster situation here. And I only pick him over Edwards because Louisville's roster is so new. I mean, it's completely new. Everybody is new. And while I think Edwards is going to have a big role, and I think he's an incredibly talented player, guy averaged 17 a game at James Madison last year, I just don't know exactly how everything's going to shake out for Pat Kelsey's team, to the point where I'm not extremely confident in knowing enough about his role to know whether he ends up in this conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was going to go with Edwards as my most confident for this pick. The one I will go on the opposite, the least confident I am, is Tyler Johnson.
Yeah.
For a couple reasons. Number one, he's a bit, he's like 6 foot. And that's not to say these guys, I mean, the ACC player of the year last year was 6 feet tall.
Right.
And so there's that. But there's the fact that he's coming in alongside Hunter Salas, who is going to be the more ball dominant guy.
Yeah.
And so I do have a little bit of question about Tyler Johnson's role. And then there's also just is the Louisville stank on him? I hate to say that, but we've seen it from a couple other guys. And so like last year, shot 19% from three, Andy, on two attempts a game, 8.7 points. And so he's probably the one I feel least confident in. Like, for example, with the other guys, I think Cade Tyson's shot is going to translate up. He's got the size. I'm not concerned about that. I think Javion McCollum does as well. I'm with you. Sion James, man, he's like, I don't want to encounter you. You just seem like a very hard individual. And I like that for a basketball player. And so that's where I'd go on my most and least confident of those 5. Andy, we put in 5 kind of honorable mentions here, and I'm curious if there's any that we've missed. I'm sure folks are chiming in like crazy to say you guys are idiots and why didn't you pick those? But let me just list them off and give us any takes you have on this. Andre Stojakovic, who transfers from Stanford to Cal, just smart Northern California to smart Northern California ACC powerhouse. Chucky Hepburn coming from Wisconsin to that loaded jumble of a Louisville roster. Lynn Kidd comes from Virginia Tech to Miami. Is he the new excuse me, I'm choking on my saliva here. Gosh. Anyway, there we go. You're with me. Eddie Lampkin comes from Colorado to Syracuse, and Kasean Pryor from South Florida to Louisville. Andy, of all those guys, anybody that stands out, yay or nay to you?
Yeah, it wouldn't really surprise me if any of these guys end up being among the 5 biggest or best performing transfers in the conference next year. Hepburn stands out to me as a guy who's been a starter for a high-level program in Wisconsin for multiple years. He's kind of going to be a steadying presence for that Louisville roster again. Pat Kelsey plays a high-octane offense. It's going to be different than what he's used to with the Badgers. I suspect he is going to acclimate well to a more up-tempo, higher-paced offense. But without having seen it, he's in a new offense in a new conference with entirely new teammates. He's a little bit more difficult to kind of project exactly how that's going to shake out, but the high upside, the high, like kind of the best outcomes for Chucky Hepburn absolutely have him as an all-ACC caliber player, and certainly one of the most prolific transfers in the conference. So he's kind of the name that stands out to me there. Lynn Kidd, similar situation, I think, helps replace some high-level talent leaving Miami. Norchad Omier, Kidd's going to step into a big role right away, already familiar with the ACC. I think that helps him be somebody who can kind of immediately play. And we've seen Miami, they had a lot of success with transfers in the Jim Larinaga era. We saw with Matthew Cleveland, we've seen with Nigel Pack. Like, he does a good job with transfers, and I suspect Lynn Kidd's going to have pretty immediate success for the Canes.
Yeah, absolutely. Stepping into that Norchad Omier role that I couldn't get out. earlier, Andy. Going to be super fun. And inevitably, folks, here's how this goes. There are going to be probably 5 completely different dudes that are none of these 10 we just named that would actually be on our ACC All-Transfer first team at the end of the year. So it'll be fun to see where we're just dead wrong and who we might actually hit right on.
Well, as we talked about the best players, now we're going to talk about which teams have the best transfer portal classes in the ACC. Some teams with 10 plus transfers, some teams with just a couple transfers. We're going to talk about all that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Ibata. Are you taking that dream vacation this summer, but you're dreading the cost? With Ibata, you get cash back on all of your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories and less time just dreaming about them. With Ibata, earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, a flight you've been eyeing, or that fancy dinner that you've been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who choose Ibata to earn cash back every single time they shop. And right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying the app by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back using code LOCKEDONCollege. Ibata, that's IBOTTA, in the Google Play or Apple App Store using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, folks, Locked On College Basketball. Andy Patton here, joined by my co-host Isaac Shade, talking ACC as we go through our transfer week here. And folks, if you want to learn more about the teams in the ACC, the players in the ACC, the new transfers, how the season's going to shake out, all of that, absolutely check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Ken Gibbs, Alex Dono do a fantastic job with that show, talking all things. They're talking football, they're talking realignment, they're talking basketball. Anything you want to learn about the Atlantic Coast Conference, definitely check out Locked On ACC. It's available wherever you're listening to this show, 5 days a week, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Mr. Shade, let's take a look at not the players, the best players necessarily that are joining the conference from the transfer portal, but let's take a look at the overall classes per team from the ACC. And this in particular, I'm glad we're starting with the ACC because one of the unique challenges of trying to kind of rank the various classes in each conference is some teams only have 1 transfer or 2 transfers. Some teams have basically an entire roster of transfers. And Louisville is one of the most kind of notorious teams in this conversation because they're pretty much their entire roster came out of the transfer portal. So if you're talking like, okay, which team is going to have the highest, total points per game from transfers or highest any stat, it's going to be Louisville. It's going to be Louisville every single time because they just have so many players coming from the transfer portal. But does that make it the best class? I think that's kind of the challenge of this conversation and comparing this class to, Duke and SMU and Virginia and some of the other teams that are in this conversation is a unique challenge. But the reason that and you can say, how you feel about it, but the reason that I still have Louisville number 1 is not just the overall quantity of players that are coming in from the transfer portal, but the quality of player joining Pat Kelsey's team is really significant. We talked about Chucky Hepburn, a multi-year starter at the Big Ten level from Wisconsin. We talked to Terrence Edwards. They're also bringing in Corin Johnson. They're bringing in Javon Hadley from Colorado, Kasean Pryor. They're bringing in like Noah Waterman from BYU. Like this is a really talented and deep transfer portal class for Pat Kelsey and the Cardinals.
Yeah, Andy, that's the nice thing about this Louisville class is we don't have to debate quality versus quantity because it does have both. There's 8 million transfers, but there really are some high-level guys of which we, obviously by our first team, we think Terrence Edwards will be the dude, at least probably from a scoring standpoint. But man, I love Kasean Pryor. There's a bunch of other high major teams that really wanted him to come in. Noah Waterman was like a later one. You got Traore coming in from Long Beach State, the Abubakar version, not the Johan version. And so there's just, I think there's enough here that not only are some of them, it's like you don't have the name recognition or the dudes. And so it's like, who is it that's going to pop? Out of this one, there's almost like expectation that dudes are going to pop, and it's going to have to because they've got an entire roster's worth of transfers. So it's literally, as you were saying earlier, there's nobody else. And I wish Ali Khalifa wasn't redshirting this year because I'd love to see how he'd fit in. to all this, and Coach Kelsey brings a couple Charleston guys over with him. So, yeah, I am with you on Louisville. I know when we talked about the ACC a couple weeks ago, I think we highlighted Virginia's roster, but ultimately, yes, I would go with Louisville here for the number 1 slot.
Yeah, when we were making this list, we kind of, we'll talk about the final 2 teams, but we kind of picked the top 3 fairly quickly. Of like, these are the 3 teams that we definitely feel belong in this conversation that are at the top. Louisville was one of them, and then Duke and Virginia were the other 2. And Virginia, like you said, we talked about them a few weeks ago as a class we're really intrigued by. And the reason that I'm intrigued by Virginia in particular is just the amount of players they're bringing in who have multiple years of eligibility left. I think it could be a situation where if Tony Bennett's able to retain said talent, which is not a given in the modern college basketball era, but if he can kind of grow with this group, you got a 5-person class coming in. You got Day Ames from Kansas State, Carter Lang from Vanderbilt, TJ Power from Duke, Elijah Saunders from San Diego State, Jalen Warley from Florida State. Most of those guys have multiple years of eligibility. You kind of grow with that group. I could absolutely see this being a class that really helps Virginia kind of get back on track. And I know they made the tournament last year, but it wasn't a good showing for them, to put it lightly. So I think this could be a group that really kind of helps turn this team around. They're a little bit more riskier, I think, than some of the other classes. But I really like the upside and the potential that we could see from this Virginia group.
Yeah, that was putting it very nicely, Andy. They were terrible in the NCAA tournament. I still maintain that their Pitt should have been the team that was in their place. So Virginia is our number 3 team on this list. Duke is our number 2 team. And Andy, the key here with Duke, and I think Coach Shire and his staff handled this very well. This wasn't about going out and landing stars. This was about going out and getting role players with experience, veterans, to surround these incoming freshman stars, along with some of the returning guys like Tyrese Proctor. And so that's what they've done in getting Sion James, who we talked about earlier, in getting Mason Gillis, who's just been such a steadying presence at Purdue. 6'6", a guy that I thought was going to have a major role for the Boilermakers this year had he stayed. So that was kind of a surprise to me. And then Malik Brown coming over from Syracuse, Andy, could be, if not ACC Defensive Player of the Year, one of the best defensive players in the ACC this year. And so I think there's a lot that he'll bring to the table too, as a 6'8" power forward. There's a lot there with that. And so I'm interested to see how that all fits. I think the key for Duke's transfer class being able to be as good as it can be is that the incoming freshman stars are willing to listen and learn. If they're able to do that, which I think they can, because Coach Shire won't allow them to not, that it could be a really impactful thing.
Looking ahead to the other 2 teams here, we had 6 or 7 teams that we kind of realistically considered for these final 2 spots. And this one maybe is a bit more of a surprise, not a team people would have expected to hear here, but we're going to talk about SMU, one of the 3 newcomers to the ACC alongside Stanford and Cal, coming from the American Athletic Conference, got a new coach in Andy Enfield coming over from USC. And it's a 6-person class, and there's a lot of talent joining this Mustangs program. You have Kevin Boopy Miller, who was excellent last year at Wake Forest. You have Johan Traore, who I think is the biggest kind of hinge in terms of whether this class ultimately ends up being one of the best in the ACC or not. Traore was a top 25 prospect a couple of years ago, went to Auburn, did not do well at Auburn, transferred to Santa Barbara, very quietly put up like 14-5 for the Gauchos last year, transfers again. Now he's at SMU. 6'10" big man, got a lot of skill. If he can kind of become even close to the player that people thought he was going to be out of high school, that's a really nice get for SMU. They get a veteran guy in Matt Cross, who's been very productive at UMass the last few years. Kario Akendo was productive at Oregon and Georgia before that. Jarrell Colbert from Kansas State. Like, this is just a good group, a talented group. I think you're going to see a lot of these guys fill very, very valuable roles for Enfield's team. And I think ultimately, when all is said and done, we're going to look at this group as one of the more productive groups of transfers in the ACC this upcoming season.
And to wrap our top 5 of the ACC incoming transfer classes, we went with Miami, and what Coach Larinaga does is, Andy, as you talked about earlier, some of this is the track record that we've seen from Coach L of being able to get in guys like O'Meara, like Nigel Pack, and be able to work with them. And Andy, what's interesting is I don't think we were initially really leaning towards this Miami team, but the more we kind of dug into some of the numbers, I think the more interested and excited we got, particularly with like Jalen Blackman, who had 21 a game, was it, at Stetson last year? I mean, it's just stupid stuff there. 38% from three on 8 attempts a game. Andy, 90% from the free throw line. I really like what he brings. Lynn Kidd, who you talked about some earlier, is just, he was a dude at Virginia Tech, 13 and points, 6.5 boards last year. Brandon Johnson coming over from ECU, 6'8", so a little bit undersized power forward for the ACC level, but 14 points, 8.6 boards. We haven't even talked about AJ State McCray, coming over from Buckyball, and so just knows how to go and be a dude in the Miami system. So look, there's some good possibilities with this Miami crew coming in. All right, well, gang, we've gone from our first team All-ACC transfer class to giving our top 5 ACC transfer classes. Next, we're going to, as I said earlier, open up the yearbook, hand out some ACC transfer superlatives, and then do all that to wrap the show. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Andy and I, we love sports so much, and we never want them to stop. But here in the dog days of summer, we just get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But the good news is that FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you got to do is open the app, dream up any bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, the good news is that FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Typically right now, all we got is Major League Baseball to go on. But the good news is that right now we are in the midst of the Olympics. It's the first full week of it, and you'll love it. So let me give you some Olympics odds. Most gold medals are fair United States of America. To those of you, I shouldn't assume that everyone's a U.S. person listening or watching to this. America is favored to win the most gold medals, minus 550. China's second at plus 350. Massive drop off to Great Britain in third at plus 4,200. Let me give you one other line. Most overall medals, this is silly how wide these odds are. U.S. favored at minus 2,000. China second at plus 1,500, and then Great Britain, Japan tied in third at plus 6,000. So if you want to get in on any of that action, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Wrapping up our ACC transfer show today by talking about some ACC superlatives. We have done our very best to stay away. Actually, not done our very best. We have stayed away from giving anyone 2 awards because we're just stingy like that. No, we just want to make sure that we get a lot of these various names.
Spreading the love.
Spreading the love out here. So, Andy, first out, and we'll also give an honorable mention for each one as well. Andy, most likely NBA draft pick. Who's our pick for that one?
Yeah, this was a tough one. I think there are some potential kind of dark horse candidates and some guys we'll talk about a little later who I think at this time next year and this, roughly a year from now, it might look silly, the players we talk about, because I think there are some obvious candidates who could just explode and have phenomenal seasons and be clear-cut NBA draft prospects. I don't think Hunter Salas would have been the obvious pick at this time last year, for example. I know he didn't actually stay in the NBA draft process, but he's certainly a prospect. The pick here is Terrence Edwards, and we've talked about Terrence Edwards a few times. Like we said, we tried to not necessarily overlap too much, but Edwards is such a productive player at James Madison last year. We kind of expect him to have the keys to the kingdom for this Louisville roster. They're going to be up tempo. They're going to do a lot of scoring. He's got a pass first point guard on the roster in Chucky Hepburn. He's got some floor spacing bigs, which gives him more room to potentially operate as a downhill driver. I would not be surprised at all to see Terrence Edwards put up similar scoring production to what he did at James Madison. And if he goes out, if he averages 17, 18 points a game for Louisville, if they turn things around, if they make the NCAA tournament, that's an incredible turnaround for Pat Kelsey. But even if they don't, they finished 500 in conference play, look much improved, and Edwards is kind of the star. Wouldn't shock me at all to see him in the NBA draft process.
Ooh, that's fun. With our honorable mention for this one being Cade Tyson from Belmont to North Carolina. We believe in his size, in his shooting, one of the best three-point shooting percentages in the nation last year. But the thing that just keeps sticking out to me about Cade Tyson is he actually had more 2-point attempts than 3-point attempts. So we'll see how that translates. But what does the NBA want? Shot makers. Cade Tyson can do it. Andy, sophomore breakout. I'll start with this one and then pass to you. This is a guy that last year was at Iowa State. We thought he was going to be their best freshman. Spoiler alert, that was actually Momcilovic, who was an absolute dude. Can't wait. I think, speaking of sophomore, well, we'll save that for our Big 12 show. He's not a transfer, whatever. Anyway, one of his teammates last year, Omaha Biliu, who coming into the year was everyone's pick for Iowa State's freshman to go off. He transfers to Wake Forest. We've talked about Wake Forest a little bit and Coach Forbes' ability, similar to Coach Larinaga, to take transfers and just do the Lord's work with them. We've seen that so far with guards. Can he now do it with a big? Be interesting to see. Hopefully, we want these guys to do well. And so I really want to see Biliu take a big step up from the year he had at Iowa State.
Yeah, there's a lot of sophomores who I think could potentially break out at new schools in the ACC. This was a tough category to pick. I think Biliu is definitely into. Yeah, I think this is definitely the right choice here. But we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Andrei Stojakovic. Like we mentioned, transferring from Stanford to Cal. Unique. It's still in conference like it used to be, but it's both schools in a different conference now, obviously. Very excited to see Stojakovic. Many people thought he was a one and done potential candidate at Stanford last year. And he frankly wasn't very good. His efficiency numbers were really bad. He didn't shoot well from three. He didn't finish well around the rim, but the upside is still absolutely there. We've seen players who commit to Jared Haas in Stanford, who play okay at Stanford, who then play better at other places. Cough, cough, Harrison Ingram is perhaps the most notable example of another ACC transfer in that regard. We'll see what Stojakovic can do. I've liked what we've seen from Mark Madsen up to this point. I think he does a good job of getting a lot out of the players who come into his program. A change of scenery for Stojakovic, even if he's still driving on a lot of the same roads in the Bay Area, could potentially lead to him having a breakout year. So he definitely is a part of this conversation with Biliu at Wake Forest.
Andy, who's our pick for dark horse transfer dude?
Yeah, I went with Victor Locken, transferring from Cincinnati to Clemson, a guy who was very productive for Wes Miller and the Bearcats last year. 6'11" big man. He's a good rebounder. He's a good scorer. Nobody's going to be able to fully replace PJ Hall for Brad Brownell's team. That's a really tall order to ask if anybody. Hall was a phenomenal player.
A tall order?
Yeah. Yes, a Hall tall order. But Locken, he projects similarly. Like, I think Clemson will utilize him similarly to how they utilize PJ Hall. And they have some of the key returners around them, obviously Ian Shefflin being a notable one. I think for Clemson it's going to allow Locken to step into a big role, to be featured offensively, to be able to do a lot of different things. Brad Brownell is a quality coach and has gotten a lot out of players coming into his program in the past. And again, Locken, like 9 points, 6.5 boards last year in the Big 12 for Cincinnati. So I think he has the ability to be a very impactful player. He's not getting a lot of attention. Clemson's transfer portal class isn't getting a ton of attention, but I think this is quietly a really quality addition for Brownell and the Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, that front court with he and the chef should get a ton of rebounds, Andy. And then Johan Traore from SMU, who we mentioned earlier, is our honorable mention there. We'll pick up the pace a little bit, but best fit here, we've got Kasean Pryor to Louisville. Andy, this is somebody that you and I both love. And just there's so many things that he has in his game, so many pieces with the attention that we think Terrence Edwards should draw, with some of the other guys in the lineup and other things. I think Pryor is going to have the ability when, he is kind of able to fit in a little more than he was able to do at South Florida, where he's kind of, a dude. Should be great. And then our honorable mention here would be Mason Gillis. We talked about all the reasons for that earlier, but just being able to be a consistent, solid guy, role player, kind of Yoda-ish confidant, now guiding and leading the way for these young Duke superstars.
Last one we're going to talk about here is the best up transfer. So somebody who's not transferring from another high major program, but rather from a mid-major team. And we eliminated the options for guys who we already talked about in the first segment as potential all first team ACC type guys. So we're not talking Terrence Edwards. We're not talking Sion James. We're not talking Cade Tyson. So instead, we're going to talk about a guy we mentioned briefly already, and that's Jalen Blackman. Transferring to Miami from Stetson, dude who averaged 21.5 points a game last year, shot 38% on 8 3-point attempts per game. That is just obscene levels of productivity for Miami. They lose Wooga Poplar. They lose a handful of other talented guys. They lose Keyshawn George, who is a prolific 3-point shooter for them. So they need some floor spacing. They need somebody to step in, be a high-level scorer in the guard room. I think Blackman is absolutely ready for that role. And I think productivity-wise, he could be right on par with those other guys we talked about as potential first-team caliber guys.
Woo, that's going to be fun. And then the honorable mention for us in the best up transfer is Rytis Petritis going from, I just feel like every time I say his name, it's like I want to write a poem.
It's a weird name.
Air Force, moving from Air Force to Cal, and we'll see how that goes there. It's funny, we joked earlier about is it really all that much of a transfer up to go to from Air Force to Cal? But there you go. All right, gang, that is our ACC transfer show. Thanks so much for diving in with us. Andy, I'll pass it off to you.
Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And like we said, it's transfer week. This is what we're doing all week long. If you loved this, if you were like, yep, I want to hear more about this, I want to hear about it for my team, for my conference, stick with us because we're doing Big 12. We got Big East coming on Wednesday. We got SEC on Friday, and then we got somebody else on Thursday. Big 10. Big 10. I swear I didn't forget about you, Big 10. I promise. Big 10 coming on Thursday. All sorts of fantastic stuff. Really looking forward to digging into these transfer portal classes for each of the power conferences. We'll wrap it up next Monday, talking about the rest of the schools in the NCAA as well. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until Tuesday, when we talk Big 12, peace.